What's going on, guys? It is Radigan from Radigan's Corner. Now for today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Beatles. The Beatles are, one of the most iconic bands in rock and roll music. I mean, they did so much. They were four talented guys, John, Paul, George, Ringo, and their songs, I mean, their song, like Lennon and McCartney's songwriting is unbelievable. The songs that they accomplished and wrote and stuff like that, it's really amazing. But we're not here to talk about the songs that they wrote. We're here to talk about the covers of songs that they did from other artists, like Chuck Berry, Little Richard. Because I felt like this video would be good to talk about. There's so much stuff I want to talk about with the Beatles, and I will on this channel eventually. But I thought for today, why don't we just talk about songs that they covered and stuff like that, because that's another great part of the Beatles catalog. Because like for instance, like Twist and Shout is their most famous cover they did. Mistakenly, I bet people will probably think it's a song that they wrote. No, it was a song originally by the Isley Brothers, and it's their most notable cover that they did. They're also notable for doing Roll Over Beethoven with George singing, and yeah, I mean the covers are what helped them too, honestly, get on the map too. Like even like with Twist and Shout, when the Beatles in 1964 dominated the charts with 5 songs in the top 10, like on the top 5, I believe it was "Can't Buy Me Love," "Please Please Me," "I Want to Hold Your Hand," "She Loves You," and the cover "Twist and Shout." So yeah, these covers that the Beatles did definitely, helped them as musicians grow, because even though these weren't songs they wrote, it showed that like they could perform any song, that they could do any song, and that's what I wanted to talk about. So from "Please Please Me" to "Help" is when they did covers on albums and stuff like that, and yeah, so like "Please Please Me" was like a mix of 8 songs that were originals and 6 songs that were covers. So yeah, so why don't we start off with the covers on "Please Please Me," and then we'll go throughout of their recording from albums like with the Beatles. There was no cover that they did on "Hard Day's Night." "Hard Day's Night" was all original songs. Beatles "For Sale" has covers, and "Help" has 2 covers. So we're gonna talk about that, and we're also gonna be talking about some of the recordings they made during that's on some of the Beatles box sets, like "Long Tall Sally" and "Matchbox" and stuff like that. So yeah, so let's start with the covers on "Please Please Me." So the first cover that we have on "Please Please Me" is "Anna Go With Him," written by Arthur Alexander. Now, this song is a really, it has John on lead vocals and harmonies between George and Paul. And I think like with this song, it's a good song because it's a ballad. It's the 3rd song on the album, and it just showed that the Beatles, could do any, like I said, could do any song. I think that with this song, it definitely shows, I think the guitar work is good. I was even listening to the other day, and I even thought, the bass lines on it is actually pretty good as well. I think it's, I've listened to the original version of, by Arthur Alexander, and that's good too. I first heard the Beatles version, and I'll always love the Beatles version. It's a sweet, love song and stuff like that. Like the harmonies are really good, and I just think John sings it well. I think, yeah, and that's like another thing with Beatles covers, when artists do covers, they usually do like their own, they try to take their own take to it and stuff like that, and do it like completely different than the original. With the Beatles, for the most part, they stuck to how the original was and just did it like, a little different, but like mostly they stuck to what the original was like in a sense. And that's basically most of these covers that I'm going to be talking about. The other cover on "Please Please Me" is "Chains" by the female group The Cookies, and that's another good song. It has George on lead vocals. Yeah, it was written by Carole King, I believe, with her husband, and yeah. That's a really that's a good song. I mean, it's definitely I feel like with that song, George does a good job. The harmonica part is good. I mean, it's not my favorite Beatles cover, but it's good. It's the first George song we ever got on an album, and so yeah, like it's okay. Like it's not, I have no complete problems with it. I think for the most part it's a decent song, and I've heard the Cookies version as well, and their version is also good as well. The other song that we have that was the fifth track on the album, which was by Ringo, called "Boys" by the Shirelles, and "Boys." It's really good. Ringo, does a good job singing on it. The backing vocals, of course, by John, Paul, George, and stuff like that. The funny thing about this song, "Boys," is that like I said, they really stuck to the original stuff when they covered songs, and they could tell you, like, for instance, when they do the song "Boys," because it was originally by a female group, so they're singing "boys" as in like how like girls are into boys, but the way the Beatles sing it is the same way. And now some people could say maybe it's like like for like guys to sing it, maybe it sounds homosexual and stuff like that, and it's like, and of course not there's anything wrong with that, but it's just that like you at that time, it's just you wouldn't hear a guy group talk about it, like in the lines, "Yeah, I talk about boys. Yeah, I need boys." Like you never would hear a guy group do that, really sing it like that. And it was interesting that the Beatles kept with that or those original lyrics, and it showed you even though like they're saying it like that, I still look at it as, even though they're singing those lyrics, I feel like they're talking about it in a girl's perspective, in that way, they're really like, because like they would have had to change the whole song around if it was like, they would have had to just call it "Girls," and then there would have been probably legal copyrights with that, and they would have had to have more. It would have probably been more legal difficulties. But I think it's good the way it is, and I like the guitar solo that George has, and I like how Ringo does it. He's like, "All right, George," and like yeah, I mean, it was just I think it's a great track. I think it's a great track for Ringo's first song on the album, and also because it was when they did this album, like, because it was their first album, Ringo was still technically new to the group in a sense, because he was the replacing guy. He replaced Pete Best, and I mean, I think what's great about him singing "Boys," I think what's great about him having a lead vocal track is that he shows that, it's not just about John, Paul, or even George for that matter. Like, all four of them, will, like, do lead vocals and stuff like that. Because, like, I always make the argument that the four of them were all like, there was no front man of the Beatles. They all were the front man of the Beatles. And by showing that Ringo, even though that he's new to the group, is still having a song on that album, shows that there really is no true lead singer in a sense, Of course, like a lot of songs were, I guess you can argue that John and Paul could maybe consider more of the lead singers, but no, they were all in a sense lead singers in a sense, And so yeah, I think it's good. Another song that we have on the album is "Baby It's You," which was also by the Shirelles, and that's a good song. It's it's got John on lead vocals, and I like the harmonies too with George and Paul. That's another great thing with this album, and it showed in the beginning of the Beatles harmonies, which was John, Paul, and George, and especially like the famous part of the harmonies I find is when John was singing lead vocals and George and Paul were the backing vocals, and they all three had this sound that was really great together. And I always did wonder why Ringo never sang harmonies or did backing vocals and stuff like that, and I guess it worked the way it was. I mean, you do wonder what it'd be like if Ringo sang backing vocals, because I guess with John, Paul, and George, they all had a similar kind of vocal style. I mean, and Ringo's vocal style, when you hear it, is a little different. I mean, well, with George and John, for instance, I consider their vocal style kind of the same. Like, sometimes when I was little, I had a hard time identifying if it was John or George. I feel like their style of singing is, somewhat similar. I mean, Paul is a little different, but it's like that I think adds well. It's with harmonies like that. It almost reminds you of like the Everly Brothers in a sense. They were really because the Everly Brothers were known to make great harmonies in songs. And yeah, no, I think so with Baby It's You. I think it's good. I think John sings it well. Another cover is Taste of Honey, which Paul does, and that's with John and George on backing vocals. And I think that's another good song. I think it's not my favorite, but it's an okay one. I think for covers it's a good song. I think it's I think Paul sings it very well. I think the guitar style, it's almost kind of like a moody kind of style of a song, the way the instrumentation is, and like the guitar, like I like the guitar work on that. And yeah, no, I think it's great. I think for the most part, it's a decent track. And then of course, the album ends with, their most notable song, the most notable cover, Twist and Shout. And that has John on lead vocals and George and Paul on backing vocals. And the call and response between John to George and Paul are also really good, and I think John has that shouting technique on the song. The song was originally by the Isley Brothers, and it was actually an interesting story was that the Isley Brothers weren't the first ones to do it. I forget what the original group was, but Phil Spector actually was the one that produced it, and I think the writers of the songs were not happy with how he produced it. They kind of thought he screwed it up, so they gave it to the Isley Brothers, and he put it in a different thing. Because when you listen to the way the original group did it with Phil Spector producing it, it's completely different than the Isley Brothers and the Beatles version. And I don't really like it because they do it in this fast way, and it's just like, it's too poppy, and it's just not, it just doesn't go well. So with the way the Isley Brothers and the Beatles did it is, better in a sense, like they do it in a slower, but somewhat fast in a sense. And I mean, of course, and of course with the Beatles song with Twist and Shout, it was like, you famously probably know it in Ferris Bueller, of course. And so yeah, yeah, it's an iconic song. They did it, they performed it very well. There's actually an interesting story on that, was that John actually was really preparing to do this, so he was really preparing his throat because he knew he was going to be singing the hell out of it. And what he did was so he was just preparing for to sing it, and also it was like, so and they made sure it was the last track they did because with Please Please Me, it was recorded, I believe, in 11 hours or something like that, and they did all the song they recorded all the songs in 11 hours, and I believe they saved that for last, and of course it was the last track on the album. And so I think this is what I think it is at the end. At the end of Twist and Shout, you hear and I would guess after hearing that story that was John, probably resting his vocals and stuff like that, resting his voice. So yeah, and no, I mean, I love that song. I think it really is. I'm going to agree that it probably is one of the best Beatles covers. I think it's really a great track. I think especially when they do the like that. I think that works well. It's just a fun track. It's a party track. When I was in camp, that was the song that we whenever you would play whenever you asked to play a Beatles song, they would play Twist and Shout. It's a party song, and even I remember going through those TV music stations, and when they have a party channel, Twist and Shout is on that. It's Twist and Shout too is most notably known for the Beatles. Like I said, everybody I think thinks that it's an original Beatles song, because I think everybody forgets the Isley Brothers did it and stuff like that. Everybody forgets that version, and whenever you hear somebody know Twist and Shout, they of course probably know the Beatles version. So yeah, and so we talked about that from Please Please Me. So The covers on with the Beatles, their second album, are really good. Like the first cover on that album is "Till There Was You," which was originally from The Music Man, and I think well, the thing that's interesting about that too is how the Beatles did like Broadway, how they actually did a Broadway show tune. Like it wasn't like an original rock song that that was played, and it shows the Beatles style to like branch out into other types of music, because like with music, like with Till There Was You, is more Tim Pan Alley and stuff like that, and so it just shows you that they didn't have to just do rock songs. And Paul sings the song beautifully. It's a beautiful ballad, and I think Paul sings it well. There's no harmonies on that. It's just Paul on the lead vocals, and I think it's a good track, and I think it's they played it a lot when it came to America, especially on the Ed Sullivan Show. They played it. That's the song that's played when they introduce their names, and of course when you see when John's name comes up, they say, "Sorry, girls, he's married," and that's the song that they played while they did that, and no, I think that's a great song, and I think it's a beautiful song, and I think it shows a good. I think it shows a good example of the way Paul can sing songs and stuff like that, and that Paul could really Paul was really in like the thing I feel like with Paul's music is that he was just able to it's like for him it was like when he did songs, it's like he didn't care if it was rock or not, he would just do the song. Like it was like, and I think it shows, like, even though at the time in the Beatles it was always John and Paul were like the leaders in a sense, and but in the first few albums John has more songs than all of them, and it just shows with Paul that even only the few songs that he had on with the Beatles album, it shows you that he he definitely has a voice, and his voice and his musical style definitely matters for the Beatles. So another cover that they did was the Motown song "Mr. Postman" by the Marvelettes, and their So Mr. Postman is a great song. It's definitely, that was the thing too with the Beatles covers that they did, because they did covers from girl groups and stuff like that, and they were really influenced by Motown music. And Mr. Postman, that's a great, really, really great song. I think it's really. I think John's voice is great on it. I think it is one of my favorite Beatles covers. It's a good song. It's catchy. It's definitely a good. It's definitely an upbeat style. It's got a good tempo. Harmonies are good. It's great. And a song that I usually hear always after Mr. Postman, and of course it's played after on the With the Beatles album. But I always compare. I always kind of play those two together whenever I hear it, which is, the other one is Roll Over Beethoven, which was a Chuck Berry song. And Roll Over Beethoven, George does this song, and he does it perfectly. He just, even though it's a classic Chuck Berry song from 1956, this song, the way George does the guitar solo on this, it's incredible. The guitar work he does, the way he sings the song, it's just it just shows that George was, a real rocker in a sense, and that he was a good musician. It also showed that George could sing as well, I believe George played guitar on it. I know that with some songs that he did, when he would sing, he didn't usually play the guitar solo. I'm pretty sure that he's playing guitar solo on that. But I could be wrong. Maybe it was Paul. But I really would think that definitely does sound like a George guitar sound to me. Because you can just kind of tell when George did the guitar and plays the guitar, and I think it's a good song for George to sing, because it shows that George can also sing and that he's not just the side man. And I think this is a great song because I think it's even though they did covers, this was a rock and roll cover. So that's like another good thing about that. So yeah, I think this is a perfect song for George and a great song on the album. And, it's of course another most notable Beatles song cover, And then another cover that they had, which You Really Got a Hold on Me, which was by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. And John does that. I like that. I like the backing vocals. I love especially George's backing vocals on it. You can definitely hear George, and that was the thing great with George when he did backing vocals. Like his backing vocals, like something like that, was very interesting. You could totally hear John. I feel like sometimes when they did backing vocals, you could hear George more than you could hear Paul at some points, So yeah, I think that's I think the way they did that song of the cover of the Miracles, You Really Got a Hold of Me, is good. Another cover, Devil in Her Heart, that George does as well. I just listened to the original version, and the original version is actually not that bad. It's just I never really I never really heard it before, and I was always trying to find it, and I could never find it, but I finally found it, and I think for the most part the original is good. And I mean, no, it's an interesting song. I don't have that much opinion on it, but no, for the most part it's an okay song. And then the way to end this album is with Money. Now, Money, that's a good song. That was written by Barrett Strong, and it's another good cover that John can do, and I think the guitar work on that is good. It's it's a rocking tempo number and stuff like that, so it works well. And yeah, excuse me, I got a cough for a second. Oh god. Don't worry, I'm fine. Don't worry, coronavirus hasn't gotten me. So, what was I gonna say? Now, other covers that they did, so there were certain covers that they did that weren't on any really, albums. I think there might have been they might have been on American albums, but not on any English albums. They did a cover of Long Tall Sally, Little Richard's Long Tall Sally, and Paul does that, and I think, it's not my favorite cover too, but I think they did a good job on it. I honestly like Little Richard's version better. I mean, it's different with Row Over Beethoven. I like both Chuck Berry's version and the Beatles version the same, but with Long Tall Sally, I just feel that the original is better because, I don't know, it's just, the original just sounds more real to me in a sense. And with the Beatles version, it's just it's a good version, but it's just it doesn't, I don't think, match up and is as good as the way Little Richard did in 1956, So yeah, and then other covers they did was, they did Matchbox by Carl Perkins, which they did other Carl Perkins songs, which was on Beatles for Sale, which I'll get to. Matchbox is done by Ringo, and Ringo and George were the ones that did the Carl Perkins stuff. And this is it's a good song for Ringo to do. I think it's a good song. I mean, it's definitely rockabilly. So yeah, I think that works. Two other songs that they did, which were Larry Williams songs, which was Slow Down and Bad Boy, which both John does. And they did, the Beatles did a lot of oh my god, I was gonna say Larry David. Are you kidding me? Watch too much Curb Your Enthusiasm, oh god. Larry Williams, he had a lot of good songs that the Beatles did. And yeah, I think Slow Down is pretty good. Bad Boy, Bad Boy definitely has a lot of is a good guitar work in that. And so the stuff for Beatles for Sale, rock and roll music that John Lennon does of another Chuck Berry song. I like how John sings that. He sings that by himself. There's no harmonies on that. I think he does it really great. I think whenever I think of rock and roll music, I think of either Chuck Berry or John doing it. I think it's a good song for John. I think that's the right. If anybody would sing that song, it's John. John just does it well. I think I think that works. Mr. Moonlight is another song that John does. That was it's funny. I just started hearing the original the other day because I never heard the original for that. And when I first heard Mr. Moonlight, I was surprised that it was actually a cover. And it's now with Mr. Moonlight, I've had mixed feelings because for Beatles for Sale, to be honest, I don't think is my favorite Beatles album, and it's one of my least favorite Beatles album actually. Because personally, at this point, the Beatles were just doing stuff like almost like they were so commercial to the point that like it was becoming a joke in a sense that it was just becoming so unreal for them. So the title of Beatles for Sale, kind of represents at that time in a sense with them, that they were just like crazily popular at that point. And Mr. Moonlight, I don't know, it's like I've grown more of a taste for it than I have in the past, because I always thought for some reason I kind of felt like it was kind of a corny lyrics and stuff like that, but it's okay. It's fine. Kansas City and Hey Hey Hey, which Paul does, which is, Kansas City, of course, was written by Lieber and Stoller, and Little Richard did it with Kansas City, which he did with Hey Hey Hey, which was another song that he did, Hey Hey Hey, and he put those two, Kansas City and Hey Hey Hey, together. And I think Paul sings that song really good. It's a really fun song, and I remember watching something with Paul McCartney on Colbert saying that was a really fun, that he really enjoyed doing Kansas City, that song. And yeah, and I think that's the thing with this out with Beatles for Sale. Like the covers that they were doing were covers that they were performing with before they were big and stuff like that. And these were covers that they liked and stuff like that. So I thought like that was good. Another song they do, which is Buddy Holly, Words of Love. Words of Love, it's funny, like, because they love Buddy Holly's music, and they finally did a Buddy Holly song. So I thought that worked pretty well. I think that was great for them, honestly, to do that. It's got like John and Paul, vocals on that. Believe it's possible George is on that. Yeah. And then another good song is Honey Don't, which was Carl Perkins song, and Ringo sings that as well. Ringo sings that other Carl Perkins song, and I think that's actually a good song for Ringo, and I think it might be honestly one of Ringo's best cover songs that he does, and might even be one of Ringo's best songs that he's done with the Beatles, honestly. I think it's a really good song. I think he does it well, though. The instrumentation on that as well, because it's just simple instrumentation. It's Ringo on drums, George on the guitar, John on rhythm guitar, and Paul on bass, It's got that 50s style, and that's what I love about it, It sticks to the original. It's not, creating its own version. It's, sticking to what the original was, and they're not changing too much about it. And I like how Ringo, tells George with the guitar song, it's like, oh, come on, George, rock for Ringo, and stuff like that. So I think that works well as well. I think that works too. I think that's great. And then another cover was another Carl Perkins song, which was Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, that George does, and I think that's another good one. That the one that was the reason why I kind of didn't like Beatles for Sale was because I always loved George songs, and I always hate the albums when George only had one track on the album, and I feel like for this album, it kind of sucked that he just had a cover song and he didn't have anything original, and I think at this point, I feel like he could have definitely had more, because I always loved when he had other original songs or something like that. I mean, at this time too, of course, he wasn't writing as much too, and even what he would do that was original, it was either written by John or Paul, and but no, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, I think George does that well. I think the guitar work definitely represents, I think definitely, mimics the sound of Carl Perkins, the way he did it, and I think that's a decent track, and I think Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, for the most part, I really like it. I think it's, for the most part, it's a good track. I think it's a good cover of Carl Perkins' version, so yeah, I don't have any complaints with that. Now, on the Beatles album Help, that was the last album where they did covers, and the two covers on that was Act Naturally, which Ringo does. Ringo honestly did a lot of covers in the first few Beatles albums and stuff like that, and I think Act Naturally, for the most part, it's a country western song, and Ringo sings it well. I think it's okay, It's just a fun song. It's nothing, it's not their great cover, but I think, it's a good song. And then, John does another Larry Williams song, Dizzy Miss Lizzy. I think they did that song good. I think John does it well. I mean, my favorite Beatles covers are always, I think, with John, because, John does it well. It's a good way to end the album Help. Help is one of my favorite Beatles albums, and I think it's great. And I think that was a good song. I think the guitar solo on that, too, is good. I think the drums are good, and I think, I honestly, too, like Beatles songs that just have them and there's no harmonies. Even though I love Beatles harmonies and stuff like that, I like songs that are just, with just themselves. Like, I like the Disney Miss Lizzie because it's just John, you know, and stuff like that. So I think that, that's great. I mean, like, yeah, like, my favorite Beatles covers would probably be Mr. Postman, Roll Over Beethoven, Till There Was You, you know, Twist and Shout, Baby It's You. Those are probably, like, my 5 favorite Beatles covers. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Yeah, so hit that thumbs up, hit that bell notification, and hit that subscribe button. So thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!